When you're picking out a tabletop role-playing game, do you prefer ones where you are controlling a single character and only what they can do within the story? Or do you like games where you get to pilot the character's story itself, controlling things outside of just what that character could do within the fiction? You see, I think this is actually the most fundamental and foundational difference between different ideologies in tabletop role-playing games, even more so than rules light versus rules heavy, or crunchy versus story. It's about what powers the rules are giving the players at the table and how far they extend. Hi, I'm Peter, creator and lead designer of Tales from Elsewhere, and I've been playing tabletop role-playing games for over 25 years now. And today's lecture is going to be a discussion on how far your rules extend for the player's control within the story. Because I really do think that this separates tabletop design and gameplay so much more than almost any other ideology out there. So let's open up Excalidraw and I'll unpack what I'm talking about here. The goal of every tabletop role-playing game is to have fun and create a story by the end of the session. Whether you're kicking down dungeon doors and chopping off the heads of goblins, or solving cozy eldritch mysteries, role-playing as old ladies on the New England coast, the goal is that by the end, you and your friends have had fun, told a cool story, maybe rolled some dice. Now, I'm a firm believer in that the narrative, the story, is what is created together at the table through the play of the game in one way or another. And both of the ideologies I'm presenting today accomplish that in their own way. I know some of you watching may already be pretty entrenched in one of these two camps, and I just ask that keep your open mind here and try to understand the draw of the other side's way of playing, as all of these are totally valid. Additionally, this is about the design of the game, the rules as written, not the way that we interpret or break free of those rules at our tables. Because the great thing about tabletop role-playing games is we can play them however we want. You have the book, you sit down, you can do whatever you want with it. But this channel is about how we design tabletop role-playing games, so we have to approach things with a little bit more intentionality than that. We need to look at how it's actually presented as a set of instructions to the players. So I'm going to define a couple terms here and show you what I'm talking about. Any rules system that you give to the players is either going to allow them to control an avatar or a story. And this can encompass not just an individual rule, but a game's ideology as a whole, or a little corner of that game. Really, we're not looking at trying to say D&D 5e is an avatar type game, while Brindlewood Bay is a story type game. There's going to be elements of these aspects in pretty much every role-playing game, though some do fall more extremely on either side. Now, an avatar-type rule structure is one that allows you to pilot that specific character and only what that character could accomplish within that world. So this is things like the feats you'd give a character in a game like D&D, or the spells they cast. The things the player sitting at the table gets to do with these rules all transfer through the avatar within the game world. And what they can accomplish doesn't extend beyond that. Put another way, everything the player can do in the game could be justified in the physics of the world. That the character in that story, removing the player from the equation even, could accomplish these things. It doesn't break the reality bar or go meta outside of this sack of meat walking around within the dungeon. A rule that allows story manipulation is one that extends beyond that. These are things that let the player sitting at the table construct the narrative and manipulate it around their character, creating NPCs, adding things to the canon of the story, or manipulating fate and the die results that surround the character. All of which don't have an in-fiction explanation as to how they would work within the game itself, within that imagined space. And the goal of those kinds of rules is to allow the players at the table more share of the storytelling process rather than simply puppeting the one character inside the game. The goal still being to create a fun story by the end of the session, it's just the powers extend a little wider than they would within an avatar structured rule. And it's important to note that this isn't even about the rules language itself, it's how the rules are presented. Because let's look at an example of how we could take a single ability you'd give to a player and conceptualize it as either. Take a look at this pseudo rule that I wrote here. As we do sometimes on this channel, we write pseudo rules. It says, at the start of a session, roll a die and record the result. You may replace one other die result with that number before the end of the session. This could be presented as an ability that the avatar does, the character in fiction, or one that the player sitting at the table gets to enact while playing. For example, we could call this a spell named Oracle, that the character in the game is casting a spell that lets them glimpse into the future, and that is represented by a die roll you record and then predict what will happen next. The divination wizard in D&D 5e is an example of this. But it could also be presented as a player rule called heroic control, in which the player sitting at the table has a greater control over the fate of the character they're controlling than the character itself would in the fiction. In both of these cases, we have a character and are attempting to manipulate aspects of that character's gameplay experience. In one of them, it represents only what that character could do in the fiction, right? The control is only extending out just barely outside of them, right? Because it's all that they could do using their magic. But in the other, that control represents so much more than that, because it represents their ability to manipulate the narrative structure around them, even if the rule was the same. Most tabletop role-playing games include elements of both to some degree or another, even ones that you might think are so squarely in one camp. For example, games like Dungeons & Dragons or Pathfinder are very much an avatar rule structure game, right? They involve you creating this character, and all you do is really what that character can do in the fiction. But consider this, choosing the species you're born as, who your parents were, what town you were in, all of that is narrative control about the nature of your character. Unless you're using die rolls to determine it, that is you extending out into story control via the rules as presented. If I want to be an elf who was raised in Baldur's Gate, that's awesome and totally valid in D&D. In real life, we don't get to pick who our parents are and where we were born. On the other end of the spectrum, games built in part on Powered by the Apocalypse often give you much more narrative control. We have games like Brindlewood Bay and Blades in the Dark as really classic examples. For example, in Blades in the Dark, the characters can rewind time, as it were, using the flashback system. This is controlling the narrative flow in a way that something like Pathfinder or D&D doesn't generally let you do. There isn't an in-fiction explanation as to why these scoundrels can retroactively say they met this guard outside the pub on the night before and became his friend. It is a story control you're giving to the player. Similarly, in Brindlewood Bay, the solving of the murder is a story manipulation rule structure, not something in fiction that the characters are controlling. But both of these still involve die rolls and some form of ability check, things that the character's avatar within the story are accomplishing. And the draw of these avatar-style rule structures is that you as the player get to live the story yourself. You get to be a character in this greater story that you don't have control of, and all you can do is really fight for what you believe in and try your best. The story gets revealed to you through gameplay and the GM's guidance, and you know that you have this discrete set of abilities that you have to use to see your way through. It's a very immersive experience in a fantasy when you play these style of games, and that's one of the big selling points for it. You can get lost in that world and become that character in a way that isn't accomplished in the same manner within a story control structure. The detractors from this structure find it too constrictive. They will find that the rules themselves are getting in the way of the actual story that the table wants to tell. And they want the players to feel like they get to contribute in the writer's room a bit more, with a democratization of the story creation process rather than a director with a set of actors. Story-focused rule structures are giving the player control over the narrative itself, putting them in that writer's room and allowing them to put one hand on the steering wheel of the game story itself. It's empowering to democratize that responsibility a bit more, where each player feels like they're substantively contributing to the writing of a grand story. Proponents of this also totally believe that at the end of the session, looking back, it's not all that different whether or not the avatar within the system was doing the rolling or the abilities, or the player controlling them, because it is just a game after all. And it's looking back on that session and the laughs and adventure and dangers and frights that you had that is the story itself. And to bind you and limit you to just what the character in fiction can allow you to do is against the spirit of that more free-form and collaborative storytelling process under this ideology. Detractors of this structure will argue that it's immersion breaking. Whenever the rules talk about the actual game itself outside of the fiction, whenever it pulls you out and asks you, the player, Peter, sitting at the table, rather than the barbarian I'm playing, when it asks me to do things, when it asks me to take control, it's snapping me out of this shared imagined world that I'm losing myself in. And so that's often what pulls people out who prefer the more avatar-based rules. Now, like I said at the start, there isn't a right or wrong way here to design or play a role-playing game, but it's about that intentionality. And breaking from maybe my normal approach, I'm going to tell you what I personally prefer in my tabletop role-playing games and the kind of structure that I'm more willing to keep playing long-term over maybe just one-shots. And I'm like 90% on the avatar side of things. I prefer to primarily control a in-game character and get immersed in that process rather than control the meta-narrative surrounding them. I don't really want to be Neo from the Matrix, whose narrative control extends pretty far from his body itself. But I like a little dash of it. I like to have that remaining 10% small, fun, additional contributions that I can make as a player on occasion. I don't want to grab the steering wheel, I just want to nudge it sometimes for enhancing whatever the genre is of the game I'm playing. And this can come in all sorts of forms. I believe that 10% could be significant control over my character's backstory before the session begins. Small things like the ability to let me occasionally add an NPC into the game, or retroactively change a small detail within the game world, but I prefer those to sit behind the primary avatar rule structure and let me just occasionally sprinkle the story with some tidbits, because I want to lose myself in that world and make decisions entirely as that character, less so about Peter meta-controlling that one. But hey, that's just what I prefer, and I'm not your dad. You can play your games however you want. You can take D&D 5e and really add a lot more story control for your players if you want to. That's the beauty of this tabletop role-playing game. But again, if you were designing your own tabletop role-playing game, consider what aspect of this ideology you're operating under, because intentionality in design is everything. And understand that no matter which side of this spectrum you fall on, or where in between you are, some people aren't going to like it, and that's okay. Design the game that you want to make, that plays the way you'd like to, and include those instructions in the rulebook. Because at the end of the day, it's your game, and you're not there to please everyone. No tabletop role-playing game makes everyone happy. It's best not to think about, well, what would D&D players like best about my game? Make the game that you want to make, targeting the type of gameplay structures and ideologies that you want. And don't let folks from the other camp try to convince you to join their side. That's not what being a good designer is all about. As always, I hope you found that interesting and thought-provoking, and if you're working on a tabletop role-playing game right now, I'd love to know where on this ideological spectrum your design falls. Are you really hardcore in one end or the other, or you somewhere in between? Let me know, and let me know why in the comments below. I love engaging in these types of interesting discussions. And if you'd like to really dig into more discussions, consider joining the Tales from Elsewhere Discord server. We actually just passed 800 members, and we have lively discussions almost every day in there, so there'll be a link down below to all that. And I hope to see you here next week on Tales from Elsewhere.